I've got three things that I'm working on right now, trying to get the stuff lined up for it anyway. One of them is this is a backseat heater, and this is the air box I got from F. Atlee Dodge for the backseat heater kit. This mounts from the inside up onto the firewall, and then it's got a little valve in here that opens and closes, and then it runs a tube here down into the side panel, and comes out right about the thigh of the pilot, somewhere around in there, to supply heat to the back seat passenger. Now what I did was, where that come out through the side panel, I put a piece of 2-inch SCAT tubing on there, scat tubing, and run it across the floor underneath the front seat, and then I took a Y and wired it off there and run one leg off of each side of the seat there, so you could get split heat into the back seat, and that worked better. There's a little flapper valve in there. I don't know if you can see that or not, but they put some kind of a seal in there on that flapper valve, and it all burned up and disappeared. And then I've sandblasted it. The outside of it wasn't too bad. It had paint, two layers of paint on it, a primer and a black finish coat paint on it, and that came off okay, except for two places around this outlet here. That plastic tubing that they used on there, instead of SCAT tube, it had kind of melded to it, or gommed onto it anyway, and it the sandblast just bounced off of it. I finally had to bring it up here and scrape it off with a knife. And then up here in the front, then the guy installed it. He'd put a whole bunch of silicone RTV around here, and that stuff just stuck to that and bounced off. In fact, it's still got a couple places where it's still stuck on there. The sand just bounces off that stuff, so now that I've got that off there, then the paint will come right off. But this flapper valve inside of here is just pitted and crusty with rust on both sides of the flapper valve. The one side is not quite so bad, but it's still not very good. And then down inside here, in these angles, in these corners, those are crusty. I've sandblasted the heck out of that, and it's still crusty and nasty in there. But this thing weighs a ton, and it's huge. We just put on that control valve for the cabin heat, and that was a heck of a lot smaller. And then the defroster one was closer to this size, but it wasn't anywhere near this heavy. So this is an awful big and heavy unit that they come up with for this backseat heat. Now the new ones, I looked at them, the new kit, it has a stainless steel box, air box in here, and it's a lot smaller than this one, and it's got a little different way of closing that off in there, so it's a lot better deal. And I was going to buy one of those, but it's pretty spendy again to buy that twice, so I think we're going to make some modifications to this, and we'll see what else we can do with the thing. Anyway, that's one of the things I'm working at. The other thing is getting this electrical stuff. This for the that goes on the firewall. This is a pressure converter for the oil pressure gauge. This hooks on there, and then the wiring that goes to the gauge plugs in there, and then we got a hose coming off the engine that hooks up to here. So we get that cleaned up, and then capacitor for noise reduction on this, the alternator or the voltage regulator, and over voltage relay there. I've got to figure out where to put those on the firewall. I got those cleaned up the best I could. They've got some rust and stuff on them, but otherwise they're cleaned up pretty good. I've got to go down to the hangar and measure the engine on the firewall and stuff, and see what much room I've got with that. And there's not a whole lot of room between that engine and the firewall, and you got a lot of stuff. It's pretty busy back there, so you're reaching your hands in there to try to change the magneto timing and a few other things. Anyway, I want to put those on there so they don't interfere with anything inside the engine compartment. The other thing that I was working on was this flap handle. This is the flap handle here. This is the little, this is the lever here, the button, push on the button to release it, and this is a little toggle, fits down in there, and then this is the latch, or the cutout notches here for the flap settings. This thing fits up through here like this, and then that toggle goes underneath there and latches and unlatches on that stop, and then this fits here like this, bolted into that, and this so this is the construction here, the handle. This is the pivot bar here, and this goes in to the bushing here on the seat, and then into a bushing on the fuselage over here, and then this bar here, and then this, of course, is where the flap cable hooks up to, is this lever right here, and that pulls it down, activates the flaps. Because this fuselage is wider, it takes a wider pivot bar, and I've got a piece, they said to get a piece of 3/4 inch 4130 chromoly steel and use that for a pivot bar, cut it 10 inches long so that it goes in. And then this is the flap handle over the top of it, and then you cut a piece of 7/8 inch tubing 2 inches long to fit as a bushing in between there as a spacer to hold this handle out away from that seat, so that this end can be inside of the fabric there, or where the line up with where the flap cable hooks onto it. Now, so I've got everything I need to do that. This is 3/4 inch tubing, and this is 7/8 inch tubing that'll fit over it for bushing. I just need to cut 2 inches off of that. Problem is this latch here, the ratchet portion, it bolts on right here on this seat, and it's got to stop right here, you know, and it moves up, or that flap handle moves up and down on it. Problem is that this thing is in at its normal position, so it's going to have to be moved out 2 inches also, and it didn't say anything about that in the instructions. I suppose the right thing to do with that would be to make up a new stop right there, bring this out 2 inches and make up a new stop for that. I've got this seat frame all freshly powder coated and everything, and all set up. I kind of hate to go cutting and grinding on that, so we got to figure out something to do there with that. Well, I've got this all sandblasted down. That was a chore. Somebody had powder coated that. Every square millimeter was a chore getting that powder coat off of there, and that just shows what some fumble thumb hammer and chisel mechanic can do with a Eastwood powder coat gun and Eastwood powder coat paint and a oven range that you picked up off the side of the street. Now, to help me figure out where to put that voltage regulator and other parts there for that alternator system on the firewall, I went down and took some measurements off the engine to see how much room I had and where I had room, and I made up this little mock-up of the engine, so I could just, it's a rough mock-up. I just made it out of some cardboard this was actually the back of some sheets of some poster board that I used for making other templates. Anyway, I got that set up where I can see how much room I've got and try to figure out where to put that stuff on the firewall. So what I've got here is I've got just about an inch of room here between the firewall and the magnetos. So this represents the magnetos here, and they're ½ inch down from the engine mounts here. And then over here, well, down here is where we've got all that casting for the oil screen and stuff like that. Well, I've got a different casting on mine because I put an oil filter on it. So this represents the oil filter here, and it's in 2 inches from the firewall and then sticks up quite a ways here. But that gives me what I need to figure out how much clearance I got. Then as you get down lower here below the magnetos, you got the muffler, and that's pretty much right against the firewall. And anyway, that'll give me a better way to visualize where to put that stuff on the firewall that needs to go there. Now this piece of cardboard here represents a hard line, and that's represented by the magnetos, which are here. This is to be the right magneto, and then you go over, and then you've got this casting right here for the oil screen, and then the tachometer cable goes right in here. Anyway, that gives me a way to lay out things here, and I can see how much room I've got up on top here and where to put that voltage regulator and the filter, the switch, over voltage relay stuff. I got the voltage regulator and alternator regulator stuff on there. Here's the can over here. That's attached with some I don't know what those are, AN 740 something or other. They're cushioned clamps instead of the uncushioned ones. They hang on to that thing pretty tight. There's a voltage regulator, and these clamps go fitted right onto the voltage regulator. And then here's the over voltage relay here, and then this is the oil pressure switch converter. Mounted it on there with another one of those cushioned clamps, and actually I've used 2 of them. I used one to hold the wire coming into it to bring it around here, so I've got clearance underneath the engine cowling when I put it on, and to hold that steady to keep it from vibrating, and that just goes through the same hole. I drilled these holes out and put number 8 floating nut plates on there. There's 3 of them underneath the voltage regulator, 2 underneath the over voltage relay, and then 1 here for the oil pressure sender. I should have just enough clearance there. It's pretty darn close, but this is where the oil filter goes, which shows up pretty close to that can, but then the oil filter is round. Anyway, we'll find out. If it's not right, then we'll have to do it over again. But that gives me close to where my wires come out of here. I'm going to have the tack cable coming out of here, and then this is the oil temperature probe here that comes out and goes, right in here, and got the magneto wires. Now I use the rivet squeezer and put aluminum rivets in this first nut plate here. Put this one on first on this voltage regulator, and then put that on there, squeeze the rivets on it, and then screwed it on and located these other holes. And then I started to put aluminum rivets in this lower nut plate, but my rivet squeezer won't reach down that far, so I used cherry rivets on that, and then I went ahead and used cherry rivets on all the rest of them here. I got thinking maybe aluminum rivets is not the best idea on this stainless steel firewall. It's probably better to use stainless steel rivets on there.